In this tutorial, we're going to begin blocking in our level using BSP brushes. Alright, so we've created just a basic room in Unreal, and we've learned how to use the basics of BSP brushes. We've learned how to get a sense of scale in Unreal, and now what we want to do is really start to block in our level. So to get started with this, let's start to cut out like doorways and windows in this building. Now we could also get into creating other rooms in this building if we wanted to do that as well. So if you wanted to create something kind of off the side here or off the back, you are more than welcome to do something like that. So just to kind of get started with this, let's learn how to add more geometry to a brush. So what I can do at this point is I can actually select this additive brush here, and I can create a brush from it. So let me hit B on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up my builder brush. Okay, and you can see that here. Now if I right click on my additive brush that I have selected, I can go to polygons and then to brush. Now that's going to snap my builder brush to the exact dimensions of my additive geometry that I had selected. Now you could also do that to your subtractive brush as well. So let's select our builder brush, and I'm going to move this off to the left, and I'm going to create kind of a small room right off of the side here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this brush. So we're going to go to geometry mode. I'm going to select these vertices by holding down Control Alt, left click and drag, and I'm going to move this in. So I'm going to move this out to this point right here. So we're looking at let's see, 256 units, 384 units right out to here. Okay. Now you can check your measurements of anything inside of your orthographic views by holding down the the middle mouse button and dragging that out, and you'll see that that kind of gives us a ruler. And you can see that that is now 384 units. Okay, so just drag that straight out. And if you release that, that's supposed to leave that brush, but I think it's because I have something selected here. Alright, so that's 384 units. I'm going to go ahead and drop down the ceiling here. So I'm going to hold down Control Alt and left click and drag. Okay, this right here. We're going to drop that down, and I'm going to make this 384 units right here. Now I'm also going to add a floor into this as well. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of room. Alright, so now that I have this, let's go ahead and add this to our object. So we're going to hit CSG add. Okay, so I've done that. Now one thing that I wanted to do really quickly is I didn't want that to be flush with the front of my building. So I'm going to hit undo, and that's going to remove that additive brush. And in my top view, I'm going to go ahead and go to geometry mode and edit this. So make sure that you're under edit, and I'm going to hold down Control Alt and then left click and drag that front set of faces, and I'm going to pull that back. Okay, now let's go ahead and close this, and that's going to just kind of offset that building there. So let's add this to our object, and you'll see that that adds that in space. But if we go inside, you'll see that that hasn't been cut out. So how do we get that shape? Well, what we need to do is go ahead and modify our brush. So we're going to modify our new brush here. So we're going to hold down Control Alt, left click and drag these vertices. We're going to bring that right up to this major grid point. That will be flush with this subtractive object. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and hold down Control Alt, left click and drag these vertices down one set of units. So that's going to be 16 units there. Okay, one grid space. And then I'm going to hold down Control Alt, left click and drag. I'm going to move this to the right 16 units, or one grid space. Okay. Let's take this inside set, and we're going to put that right up against that subtractive brush. Okay. So now if I close this and I hit subtract, you'll now see that that subtracts out. But it also subtracted out our wall. Why did it do that? Well, we didn't check our top view. So let's hit Control Z, and that was my fault. So we're going to hold down Control Alt, left click and drag those vertices. Let's make sure that we're in geometry mode though. So let's go ahead and pull that away 16 units, and this one as well. Okay, We'll close that, and then we'll use subtract. So now that we've subtracted that, we now have kind of this room in our space. All right, great. So now we can see that we've got a little bit of a top here to our building, so we can add things like windows and things like that up here. So let's get into that process. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag my builder brush up, and I'm going to create a set of windows up here, or a place for a set of windows. So I'm going to go ahead and go to geometry mode, select these vertices, drop those down. So I want to stay on my grid, so I'm going to go 16 units here. I'm going to give myself 32 units from the bottom there. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now, we do not want to create a subtractive brush right here. Okay, we don't want it to be extended all the way out like this. We normally want to take our brushes and we want them to fit right up against other brushes. So I would want to take this right out to here. Now, this process can get a little overwhelming sometimes with editing all the vertices and things like that. I'm going to hit Control Z one time, and I want to show you a really quick trick to editing the brushes. We can actually use the intersect and de-intersect to change the shape of our brushes based on the geometry that they are touching or not touching. So let's take a look at the effects of intersect. With this brush selected, okay, let me reselect this brush really quickly. With this brush selected, if I hit intersect, notice that it cuts off any of that area that was not touching a brush, and it only gives us what is touching that brush. Now if I hit Control Z one time and I hit de-intersect, notice that it leaves everything that's not touching a brush. Okay, so those are the effects that you'll get. So I'm going to use intersect in this case, and then I'm going to simply hit subtract. So that cuts out a hole in our building here. Okay, so I can put a set of windows right there. Now, one thing that I want to show you here as well is let's hit B on our keyboard and let's select that subtractive brush that we just created for those windows. So with that selected, you can actually modify the shape of any brush that you've laid down. So if it's an additive brush, you can reshape it. If it's a subtractive brush, you can reshape it. And we can reshape that by going to our geometry mode. So go to geometry mode, and notice that you can access those vertices. So what I want to do is I want to take this out just a little bit further in my length. So I'm going to hit Control, Alt, and left click and drag these vertices, and I'm going to drag these over. Now, if we close this, you'll notice that that hasn't updated. Why hasn't that cut out that hole all the way out to the edge? Well, the reason that it hasn't done that is because we haven't rebuilt our geometry. Okay, it hasn't updated the build. So what I need to do is I need to come up here to the top and go to Build Geometry. So if I build that, we're going to get a few errors. That's nothing to be worried about at this point. And you'll see that it updates that build. So now I have plenty of room to start adding in some windows in my scene here. So now what I'm able to do is I can come in and actually duplicate these brushes as well. So in my top view, if I hold down Alt and I left click and drag this brush, notice that it creates a duplicate. So I still have my original brush right here. Okay, right here in the middle. And I've got a new brush. So now what I can do is if I right click on this vertex point, it's going to reset my pivot point, and I can rotate this in any direction. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Okay. And let me go ahead and rotate that negative 90 degrees. And then I can grab my move tool, and in my top view, I can actually pull this out into the front of my building. Okay, and I can create an area for windows to go up here at the top. Okay, so I could do something like so. And I can go ahead and edit this geometry. So left click and drag those vertices, and I can drag these over. Now in my front view, I want to make sure that I have the correct set of units. So I'm 32 units away from the edge here. So 2 grid spaces away from the edge. And I can close this and then simply hit Build Geometry, and that will update that subtracted brush there. All right, great. So now the final thing that I want to do is I want to create a door in my building here. So in my front view, I'm just going to hold down Alt, left click and drag this down, and I'm going to bring this right down to the floor, which is that subtractive brush right here. And then let's go to geometry mode. Let's edit this. So I'm going to left click and drag this vertex. I'm going to bring it right over to here. Now at this point, what I want to do is I want to bring this over, and I want to make this a pretty wide door. Okay, so I'm going to go back to geometry mode. I just wanted to make sure that that side was on a grid space that I could see. I'm going to left click, or Control Alt left click and drag on that. And then we'll do these vertices as well and make that tall there. So this is let's see, this is actually 128 units from this grid to that grid. I've been calling it 64, and I apologize for that. The reason that I know that that's 128 units is because my character, which is right here, okay, is not as tall as that doorway there. Okay, so we can make this door as tall as we like at this point, but I'm just going to create just kind of a placeholder. So I'm just going to cut this out. We might go a little bit wider than this, but I'm just going to leave it just the way it is. Okay, and then what I can do is build geometry, close that, and we'll have a doorway. And I can slide this any way that I want along this space here. So if I want to make this a little bit wider, or if I just want to move it, I can right click on it to reset its pivot point, and I can slide that anywhere I want on my object here. So I'm going to put it right here around this third grid space. We'll rebuild our geometry, and we're finished there. Okay, so that is using BSP brushes in a more advanced way. And what I'm going to do is, in between lessons, I'm going to go ahead and finish out blocking out this level. And I'm not going to get very complicated with it. I'm just going to create some doorways and some windows, and you can practice doing that by using the same techniques that you've seen in this lesson. So in our next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to get into using static meshes by bringing those in and starting to get an idea of how to use the content browser and how to manipulate static meshes.